Rock Hopper here, and I'm in the Canadian Arctic in the Northwest Territories. And we're going to learn a little bit about a subject that might seem controversial to some of you. We're going to hear it from the experts, the people who have lived it and learned all about it. This is Dustin Whalen, and he's going to explain to us some things that he's learned. All right, Dustin, tell me a little bit about what's going on up here.
Hi everyone, I'm Dustin Whalen. I'm a climate scientist. I work for the Government of Canada and Natural Resources Canada. This is my 20th year, 2 decades up in this region, and what I've seen really is so much change. There's no other explanation for this change other than what's happening in the climate, and the climate all around us, whether that's increased air temperatures, it's decreased sea ice, lots and lots of erosion. And so what I guess to sum it up in just one word, what I've seen in 20 years is change. And it's changed because of the climate. 20 years ago when we came to look at the climate and look at the landscape, we could stand on a cliff that is now half a kilometer into the ocean. We're seeing areas that are eroding at 50 to 60 meters a year. These are huge blocks of frozen ground calving off into the ocean. This community in Tuktoyaktuk, it's experiencing more change because of climate than any other Canadian community. And what does that look like? It looks like coastal erosion at 1 meter, 2 meter, up to 4 meters a year. 1 meter, 2 meter, 4 meters every single year. A car length coming off the cliff every year. It's more coastal flooding. So this is a low-lying town in the community of Tuktoyaktuk. Once or twice or even 3 times a year, the ocean will rise up, in a typical storm, a storm surge. This isn't hurricane. This is just a regular storm that many coastal communities have around the world. Maybe 1 meter, 1.5 meter surge. Most of the town is impacted, and there's lots of roads flooded. And they're seeing that more and more and more. Why are we seeing this here? When you think of climate change in the world, global climate change, what does it mean? If you don't already think of temperature, you should start now, because climate change is ultimately driven by air temperature. The Earth is getting warmer. The Earth it may not be as noticeable in the southern parts along the equator or above and below the equator. But here in the north, those extreme temperatures are actually 4 times more impactful here. So let's say global mean air temperature has increased by 1 degree. It's probably closer to 2, but let's just say, for arguments, it's 1 degree. Well, in the Arctic, that 1 degree is now 4 degrees increase because of its position on the globe. What do you think when you think of the Arctic? You think of ice, right? Ice everywhere, ice and snow, white. It's totally white. What is white? The white image is a perfect reflector of the sun's energy, right? Your parents tell you to wear white in the sun. If you wear black, it's too hot. The sun's energy comes down. It's easily reflected off the sea ice. Well, what happens when there's no sea ice and now there's open ocean? Now the sun's energy is instantly absorbed into the ocean, and that energy of the sunlight and the heat increase the air temperature in the Arctic by a factor of 3 or 4 times greater than what we see on the equator. So that is decreasing the amount of sea ice, and it's leading to thaw of the permafrost. So the ground that we're on right now is totally frozen. If we were to drill down not even 2 feet, we'd hit frozen solid material. So imagine the sun's energy when it continues to penetrate through the soil, it's thawing out. So flat roads become depressed. But now we have a cliff. What happens to the cliff when the cliff is fully exposed to this warm energy coming in? It also starts to melt or thaw, and it erodes back and back and back and back from that. Absolutely, there's lots of wave action. That's a major cause of erosion, but it's also very much related to air temperature as well.
How do you think the changing climate will affect the people who live in these regions?
How I think changing climate impacts people, I think, are many, many, many ways. In this region, we are in a very strong tide Inuit region of Canada. In fact, most of the northern Canada is a very Inuit region. They rely on the landscape. Yeah, we're in a town here, but this town is just a place to live. The townsfolk who live here, 90% of the people who live here are Inuit, and they rely on the land for hunting, for peace, for cultural and spiritual reasons. So if the landscape is constantly changing, that impacts the livelihood of the people who live around here. But there's a saying that a lot of the Inuit say, we will adapt. We will continue to adapt. The problem is, though, that saying is true. It absolutely is true. But here we are in a very Inuit-dominated community with infrastructure, with buildings that you see behind me. And these buildings now are absolutely impacted by climate change. So foundation is no longer flat, right? I talked about how the ground is melting. Well, imagine your building sitting on that. Well, it can tilt.
Megan here is going to tell us a little something about what this map means.
So Tuk has been battling climate change over the last quite a few years here, and we have some maps laid out for community planning, and you can see here on this map where all the red areas are. Those we found would be the places that would be most affected by raising water levels due to climate change.
As you can see, there are quite a few areas marked on this map.
There are tons of areas that include like homes in the waterfront, on the sides here, all of which the community is now trying to remediate.
So in your estimation, climate change is a real thing and it's really happening to real people.
Absolutely. We figure that if nothing is done, we may be underwater within the next 50 years.
Imagine a road in these storms that happen. The roads will be washed away, and this isn't a freak storm. This isn't a flood that everyone talks about once a century. This is every summer. So, living with climate change and living with climate-driven forces like wind and rain, and now permafrost thaw is something people are doing here more and more. It's still really hard, and I think it does impact their way of life and their livelihood. And if you talk to the youth up here, there's a little bit of anxiety. It's funny because, a lot of our globe, that they don't see climate change right in their own backyard. I'm just going to talk about how I went to a classroom once, and the youth were so engaged because it's just right behind them, right? Where if we talk to a child from down south, they're like, climate change. Is that when it doesn't snow as much in the winter? When you talk to youth here in this community of Tuktoyaktuk, they know exactly what climate change is, because even in their short lifetime, they have seen the climate change. They have seen massive impacts of flooding and erosion, longer ice-free seasons, or thinner ice in the winter that's more dangerous for travel. They have seen this in their lifetime. And so when you go to a youth in a classroom and you say, tell me about climate change, the picture they draw are the picture of erosion, the picture of a house tilting off the bank, or a car underwater. Let's say you go to someone down south and you say, draw me a picture of climate change. It's someone with an umbrella, maybe, or it's there's no snow at Christmas or something if they're from Canada. The perception, I think, is very much in tuned in the Arctic for what climate change is. And in the news now, forest fires, unprecedented forest fires in this territory in the Arctic, and then in northern Canada. Almost above the tree line, we have fires, right? Tundra fires. And you wouldn't even think, it's cold here today, but there's lots and lots of fires because the air temperature at periods of time is warm enough to ignite the dry tundra, and it just continues to burn and burn and burn. So the impacts of climate change, I think, are felt across the world, and I think we can see them, but here they're right in your face. The best way to see climate change in front of your own eyes is to come to the Canadian Arctic and see it. Like I said before, it's erosion happening every single day, right? You can literally go to the cliff, you can see erosion, you can hear the dripping, hear the melting of the permafrost, and then you can obviously see it as well.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Speaking of people
Yeah.
farther south,
Yeah.
What do you say to the people in, say, a place like the United States, where they might say, oh, climate change isn't really happening, or the science is faulty, or the entire climate change conversation is nothing more than a hoax? What do you tell these people?
First and foremost, I believe that we all have a right to believe certain things in the way we believe them. I'm not here to judge anybody, but what I can tell you is, please do your homework, do your research. Don't just say climate change is not real because you read it in one magazine. If you ever have a conversation with somebody and you want to tell them a fact that you truly believe is real, do some research. Travel to northern Canada. My message to you, because I have been doing research for 20 years and I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, climate change is real, and I'm fully confident of that, and I am absolutely ready to argue that. So anyone that is denying climate change because they've heard it on, in a magazine or Fox News, please, tune into another channel. Tune into this channel, to this YouTube channel and other YouTube channels. Get more facts. Do your homework. Come to the Arctic and see it for yourself.
And the same is true, from my understanding, is you can go to the southern regions as well, the far south, southern Chile, New Zealand, any of those, any of those regions, and because it's much more pronounced at the closer you get to the poles. Is that true?
It sure is. So climate change is much more pronounced when it's closer you get to the poles, because this is where the ground is frozen. So remember at the beginning I said air temperature is one of the key components, the key drivers of change. And the thing is, air temperature is increasing across the globe. It is increasing in all over America, right? The global mean air temperature in America, Canada, Europe has gone up. Your summers are hotter, whether you notice or not, right? And maybe you don't, because your ground's not frozen, because your harbors aren't full of ice for 9 months. As closer to the pole you get, you have more and more ice, and more regions that depend on being cold. Well, what happens when that cold goes away in the summer? And that cold goes away at such an increased, unprecedented way that we can see climate change.
So, for instance, some people in the States might say, well, we had a very, very snowy winter, and it was very cold. So how could that be climate change and global warming?
Absolutely.
What do you say to that?
Yeah. So climate variability is very much being a part of climate on planet Earth. I live on the coast too. We can see rain one day, sun the next. Meteorology of the coast is very much driven by what happens in the ocean. What we look at as climate change scientists is the trend over time. Climate change, right? Change is time. When you have an instant moment of snow when there should be sun and climate is not changing, well, let's take a look at what the last 10 years look like on that day.
We really feel the effect of climate change on account of the weather. Our summer being 1 month longer, or fall being 1 month longer than it used to be. Shorelines, erosion, very bad. We can't go where we used to go on account of the erosion, the land change. Yeah, make it very different. Sometimes our channels get plugged up from the ocean, and you can't go upstream like you used to. You're locked out of the fishing spot where we used to fish or where we used to camp. All eroded away, very different.
And then the color of the water that's changed?
It's about 1 month early we get clear water. The water gets so low in the main Mackenzie River that our water gets clear. We used to get muddy from the river coming out, but they say that water gets so low in the river that now we start having clear water. They're actually getting water from us instead of coming down now. Big change for us.
The freeze up used to be when, mid-September?
Yeah.
And the freeze up happens around October now.
Yeah.
Mid-October or late? Even late?
First week of October. We used to go boating even in the middle of October. Pods of young ice floating around, but we still go boating. That's how late we get to go boating. We used to finish boating on middle of September. Now it's 3 weeks later than that. It changed very drastically.
And I'm pretty sure that the trend will be that it's warming up. So it's very hard to take a cover of the book, a climate change book, and judge. Open it up. Read what happened in that site, in that location, through the decades, and I guarantee you'll see changes.
Okay, so let's say climate change is real. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
What percentage would you say is just a naturally occurring change of the Earth's climate versus how much percentage-wise would be man-made causes?
That's a great question, and the question is man causing climate change? Is fossil fuels emissions in the atmosphere creating greenhouse gases that ultimately warm the temperature of the Earth? Studies have shown, and many studies have shown, that yes, it is. And in fact, you can't say that studies have shown that it isn't, right? The research and the science are driven towards the pollutants from man, from industry, from cars, going into the atmosphere, creating like an atmosphere that is able to heat global climate. Following up an effect of that in the north or in the far south, when the ground is frozen, there's decayed material, there's plant material, you can see it all. Well, all that's under the ground and all that's frozen. So if you were to thaw that, then all of a sudden we have a gas release of methane coming into the atmosphere. This release of methane or carbon into the atmosphere is also one of the main contributors to greenhouse gas and greenhouse effects. So it's like a double-edged sword. Man has created a situation where the Earth is getting warmer, but that warm temperature has also thawed the frozen ground enough that now naturally methane and CO2 is being released into the atmosphere, enhancing this global warming as well.
So would you say it's maybe 50-50?
I don't know the exact numbers on what's anthropogenic, which is man, and what's natural. What we can see from the modeling, all of the major teams that are working on this, is that air temperature is increasing very steady. In the last 20 years, the curve just rocketed up. Why did that curve rocket up? The increase in global population has increased the amount of greenhouse pollutants, and at the same time exacerbated or enhanced the natural effects. So I don't actually know if it's 50-50, but I do know that by reducing, I believe that by reducing the man-made emissions, this will have a very big impact in this already almost vertical curve that we're expecting to see in the next 80 years of global climate change. So, maybe the curve will level off. And if this was a natural phenomenon that, people say, well, the Earth goes in cycles. The Earth does go in cycles, not cycles in 20 years. The Earth cycles in millions of years, right? We as humans will not see a cycle like this. As the Earth cycles up and down, cold and warm, and different regions shifting, it's not within a human's lifetime. In my own lifetime, I can see these changes. I can see an increase in temperature. I'm not looking at data from 100 years ago. I'm looking at data from 10 years ago. And this is why I truly believe that this is not a natural phenomenon. It's a man-made phenomenon, climate change. And I also believe that man can, if we work hard enough, can fix this problem before it's too late. Not fix it, level it off before it's too late.
So from what you're telling me, it sounds like the human impact has been the catalyst that has caused, essentially, climate change. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. Human impact has been the catalyst that has caused climate change in our world today. Absolutely right. I believe this.
And you mentioned people of the North and their traditional ways of living. A lot of people here are subsistence fishermen and hunters and such. How do you think that's going to change their ability to survive up here?
Yeah, and that's a very good and sensitive question when you're dealing with people who rely on the land, right? Most of the world, or the world in America and southern Canada, we rely on grocery stores and other people to collect and gather our food for us. But here, a lot of the food is gathered by the people out on the land. And how does climate change impact their way of life? Well, absolutely. The migratory patterns of geese, of birds, and other birds are impacted by climate change. Where the birds nest may change. Caribou, muskox, these huge animals on the land that can feed a family for a month, their patterns are changing because they're following food sources in different ways. They're adapting as a species, but they're not adapting in maybe a way that is conducive to the people that live around them. Maybe finding a caribou today is harder than it used to be 20 years ago. Maybe they're sparse, maybe they're not calving as much, or just maybe they're moving away. They're moving to another spot. Beluga whale. I spend a lot of time on the ocean. I spend a lot of time on the coast studying the impacts of the ocean to the coastline. We can see the beluga whale. The migratory pattern of the beluga whale has shifted a lot. Fish that the beluga are following are also moving and adapting. Their habitats are being affected. There's a great example, salmon. Did you know that salmon, the glorious fish salmon, is an invasive species here in the Arctic? It has come up from Alaska and it's not wanted. A fisherman would grab it and you'd throw it away and kill it instantly because it's the salmon that is coming and killing all of the other fish habitat for the char and the whitefish and the E. coni. But why would the salmon be here? Because it's warmer. Now the salmon is able to survive in these conditions in the ocean. Also beavers. Beavers are a nightmare up here. It reminds me of early Canada, where settlers would come and they'd have a real hard time with beavers messing up their water supplies or changing habitats, fish habitats in certain ways. And now, just in the last decade, the Arctic is now warm enough in the summer for beavers to live and survive, and they've migrated north. And they're changing everything. Like they're a real invasive species when it comes to streams and blocking and things like that. So again, there's a call on beavers here in the north because they're changing the habitat so much. I said that the Inuit people will adapt and figure out a way, as the species do, but it is getting harder and harder and harder, for sure.
So basically, climate change is affecting really everything on this planet. Animals, humans, the oceans, the air temperature, pretty much the soil, everything there is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Climate change is affecting everything on this planet. Yeah, the humans, we are the ones who feel the most offended by climate change, obviously. We talk about it, and we're in our livelihood, our roads, our infrastructure, right? We're the most affected. Mind you, we are one of the major causes as well. The wildlife, they're not telling us they're affected, but they're adapting, right? They appear to be adapting in some ways. We can see the change. It's affecting everything.
In your estimation, do you think that climate change deniers stay in that place of denial because to acknowledge that climate change is real means that people actually have to change their habits and their ways?
I like this question. I think it's very important. I think there's two avenues of thought. If you're a climate change denier, I say to you, do more research, and you'll very soon see in front of your own eyes that the world climate is changing. But if you're a climate change denier because you don't want to believe this is something that is, that will have to change your way of life, whether it's the vehicle you choose or the recycling that you do or the way you live your life. I think there's probably a real fear in people to change. Change is something that absolutely everyone fears, but imagine this community of 1,000 people that are looking to have to relocate their whole community because of climate change. Imagine the change and the fear that in itself. So, down south we're afraid to go, or maybe can't afford the electric car, right? We can't afford to adapt to climate change down south, but in the north they can't afford not to.
Now, I've heard from talking to people in this area that what is definitely going to happen because of climate change is the sea is going to inundate much of this town. And that means, kind of like what you're saying, people are going to have to either leave or they're going to have to move their houses or something. And that's not just a local problem. This is the islands in the Pacific, or low-lying islands, or some people fear that the state of Florida being all low elevation is going to have
Yeah.
some problems. What do you think? Is this just going to affect the entire world with potential flooding and inundation of land?
Just like we talk about global air temperature, global sea level rise. I mean, obviously 70% of our Earth is water, and this is impacted by many things. But we take a step back and we look at ice. It comes back to melting ice again, melting glaciers, more input of water into the oceans, and so if you have a bathtub and you add water to it for melting ice, the water level is going to increase. This is what happens. And I actually truly believe that if we don't stop the melting of glaciers, the thawing of permafrost into the ocean, creating more water into this bathtub, it's a big bathtub, then global sea level will continue to increase. You can actually see this here in the Arctic, because this is where sea level is actually increasing faster. At almost a meter a century, global sea level rise has been increasing or projected to continue to increase. So if Tuktoyaktuk is, a meter and a half above sea level, but sea level instead of here is now here, what happens when you have a 1 meter storm? Most of the town is underwater. It's the same thing goes for the South Pacific Islands, for instance, where maybe global sea level in that region is only going to be a half a meter in a century, but they're a meter and a half above the ocean. So again, in storms, in hurricanes in that region, you're going to see an increase in water level, and you're going to see more flooding as the global mean sea level creeps up very, very slowly from the thawing of glaciers, and it's going very slowly, right? It's hard to see with our own eyes, except during storms. Because during storms, you can, even 20 years ago, parts of Tuk would never flood in storms. Now those areas always flood. We need to be aware, we need to be having lots of thoughts towards sea level rise. I think it's a very important driver of change and impact of climate change as well.
And you mentioned permafrost melting.
Yeah.
Now, is it true that the polar ice of the north, Antarctica, and Greenland are also melting quickly?
Absolutely. That is absolutely true. So I'll speak specifically about the polar ice of the north, because this is where we are. 9 months of the year, the ice comes right onto the shore, right? It's totally frozen, 2 meters thick. And then it thaws and it melts in the summer, and then we have open water. But that area of open water has been increasing every single summer. So we have the North Pole and the ice that surrounds the North Pole. Ice that surrounds the North Pole is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Hence the open water between this ice in the summer and all the land around it in the Arctic Ocean, Russia, Finland, Greenland, Canada, America, and Alaska, is getting larger and larger and larger. So the polar ice caps are melting at such a rate that you can easily see on a satellite image how the area is decreasing year after year after year. Comes back to the point is, well, last year it had more ice than the year before. You're absolutely right. But the trend, go back to the 20-year trend. The trend is there is a lot less ice there today than there was 20 years ago.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that information,
No problem.
Dustin. I really appreciate that. And if anybody wants to really learn the truth about climate change, I guess you invite them to come to the north.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Please come. Come in August, come in September. You know what? Come in June when you can see, on June 1st, you'll see ice right against the shore. By June 10th, that ice is totally gone as far as the eye can see. In just those 10 hot days, it'll melt out kilometers and kilometers of ice. In June is where Tuktoyaktuk has 24 hours of sunlight. And temperatures can get up to 30 degrees in June. So imagine an area where ice is 2 meters thick in May. By the end of June, a month later, there's no ice as far as the eye can see. Because
And when we say 30 degrees, we're talking Celsius, which is about 84 Fahrenheit.
okay, absolutely.
All right. Just wanted to clarify for our American viewers.
For sure. Yeah, 84 Fahrenheit.
And that's pretty warm by certainly by the standards up here.
Oh,
It's-
so warm. I mean, what's today in Fahrenheit? I don't know, but cold. 10 degrees Celsius in June. So we're in August today, but in June, I mean, it's that month-long period of 24 hours of sunlight. It's incredible to think that that much change can happen in 5 to 6 weeks because it's so extreme and so intense. More intense than they're used to.
Yeah, and it sounds like climate change is intense.
There it is.
So there you go. All right, well, thanks again. So what are your thoughts on climate change? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give me a like on it, share, and subscribe. Until next time, this is Rockhopper. I'll see ya.